Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next part of my scenario where a German blocking force somewhere outside Kasserine is attempting to hold back the beginnings of the US counteroffensive. So, when I last left this video, partway, well, indeed, most of the way through Deck 1, the Germans had suffered a casualty and they were under increasing pressure from the American force. In particular, their Group C, their light machine gun element, was in major trouble because one of its members was pinned and the machine gun has malfunctioned, and Private Schussel down there is going to have to try really hard to repair it. However, not all's looking bad. They have managed to press their other elements forward and they've occupied very defensible terrain, which of course, using the desert rules as we are, the buildings represent escarpments. The US, for their part, has been very gradually compressing their lines. They're not in any hurry yet. It's still only the first deck of the game. And what they want to do is to minimize any losses. There's no need for them to do a headlong rush. They are actually slightly ahead of the Germans in pushing forward. Ideally, they'd like to break the German squad and clear the way for the units behind them. They're a Pathfinder, a reinforced patrol force more than anything. But then that said, they could equally score a victory as the Germans can by being the first to occupy defensible terrain at relative range 4. So they're maintaining their line. Everyone's at the same relative range and they're within good supporting distance. The half track is out in the open, but that's not such a big worry at this distance. The small US maneuver group, Group A, the two privates with their rifles over there, they are a bit of a concern because they have very low morale, so they're probably going to get pinned a lot as they push forward. However, the weaker of the two US fire support bases, their BAR with the squad leader and a rifleman, they've also occupied an escarpment, so they're fairly safe where they are. And Group D, which is the main US infantry maneuver group, led by the assistant squad leader, the corporal, they've managed to get themselves behind a low rocky ridge. So they're not in bad terrain and they're not in bad shape. We left it off in the previous video with the end of the German turn, so we're going to press on. The US player is going to look at the cards in his hand, and well, he probably really wants some maneuvering cards about now, but beggars can't be choosers. Group A can't do anything, so they might actually try and hunker down and try and entrench themselves, because if you can't do anything else, you might as well try and offer yourself some protection. Group B can't entrench in an escarpment, but they are at relative range 2 to some of the German groups. But that generates only 5 firepower, so there's not a lot they can do with that. Similarly, the half track only generates 9 firepower. It's not quite what they need. And the group at the wall, they'd have a hard time targeting Group B. They similarly don't have enough firepower, so they can try and entrench at the ridge, but that was probably a mistake, really, yes. I think next turn the US player needs to discard some cards to try and get his hand flowing again. The Germans, in the meantime, they managed to do a bit better in terms of getting a half-decent rally card. So they're going to take a chance, or will they? Will they? No, it's far higher a priority for them to try and repair their machine gun. So they're going to attempt it. That goes out of play because that's what happens to level 3 buildings drawn as a random number check. And unfortunately, they fail to fix their machine gun. So that's not good news for them. So that's the end of their turn pretty much, and they can only discard. Now, streams represent wadis. So effectively, the terrain effect modifier remains constant. You do get a -1 defensive bonus instead of being exposed as you would be in a stream. Um, you cannot recover lost weapons, though. That is a bit of a difficult one. And also, you don't require a Ford card to get out of them. So, had this been a European scenario, it would have been tempting to discard a stream card on any moving Americans. But as it's a Wadi, probably more advantageous for the Germans to hang on to it. Really, there's not actually any cards they want to discard at the moment, so they're going to hang on to those. The United States has realized that they probably need to do something a bit different. Their chances of playing that card anytime soon are very low, so they are going to bite the bullet and discard it. Um, oh no, they won't. That would be foolish because there's two cards they have worth discarding. No, we're going to go for those two. So first, they're going to discard the wire card on the weakening element of the German squad. And then for a good measure, they're going to follow it up with a sniper attack. So sniper draws his random position check first. He is going to be aiming at the third man, the unfortunate Private Streak. He gets a 3, which sadly is no effect. Although it does give the Germans the opportunity to retaliate on the next turn. So the US player draws his 2 cards. Ah, useful. Useful. As long as that proves to be a real oasis, that might actually be quite good. Right, the Germans are in a bit of a conundrum at the moment. They don't have a movement card. So they can't do anything about that wire, and they've got that pinned man. And they've also been shot at by a sniper. There's a whole load of horrendous options there. They're going to try taking out the sniper because he's proven himself a bit of a thorn in their side. They draw their card. It's a black random number, but it only equals rather than exceeds the random number the US sniper drew. So he is still safe despite the attempt at retaliation. They really badly need a movement card now, but the other cards they have in hand are just a little bit too precious at the same time, especially those rally cards. They may come in handy. They're going to take an immense risk and hang on to these cards until they can try and sort out that team over there. Meanwhile, the US, it's very tempting to get people moving. Don't really want to move that group just yet because they do still enjoy flanking fire and we may get some low value movement cards soon. But what we will do, because it may reward the risk, is we're going to order Group A to take a few paces forward. So they switch that for a relative range 2 marker. So they're getting very, very close to the Germans now. Very brave, given that there's only 2 of them. No other American units are going to do anything. Even with the advantage of the flanking fire, those cards are simply too high in value. So the US will just sit on those and draw another one. Ooh, that's a bit better. Might have to try using that next turn. The Germans, meanwhile, their hand has not changed and their decision is an easy one. They're going to once more attempt to fix the machine gun. And they do not succeed. They're not having any luck with that thing. They're going to continue holding on to their cards and hoping that the 3 men in desperate straits over there will be able to do something. Meanwhile, Private Smith and Burke out on the left over there are going to see whether that is a genuine oasis or whether they imagined it. They make their draw, and it is a genuine oasis. Splendid. In addition to the defensive bonus, they now have +1 to their morale and panic values, which was very much what the US player wanted. In the meantime, They can't do anything at present. The half-track can, and although the infantry over there can generate a fair bit of fire because of their flanking position, it might be worth just giving the half-track a crack at it, because then they can attempt to entrench. So the half-track is going to play that card and open fire on that very vulnerable German group over there. The Germans, not unnaturally, are going to play their concealment card to try and do something about that. So it's firepower of 2, -2 for the concealment, so that's 0, +1 because they're in wire. So let us do a draw for Private Schussel. So it was 1. Nope, Schussel is fine. What about Schumacher? Nope, Schumacher is fine, and like all cards of that type, this gets put out of play. And finally, Streak. Oh, not only does Streak survive with no ill effects, but unfortunately the half-track machine gun has just jammed. That is not at all what the Yanks wanted, because it means that it really is just a big pointless liability at the moment. Right, they're going to have to try and fix that on a future turn. That's disappointing for the Americans. No damage to the Germans, and their 50 cal has gone and jammed on them. I've just drawn that card for Group D, attempting to entrench, and they fail. So, not the best turn for the US. Still, I suppose it could have been worse. They draw their 2 cards. Some potential there. That hill could come in handy if they can get to it. The Germans, increasingly desperate, are going to try and fix that machine gun, and they fail. Back to the US. Okay, we have a lot of desperate things going on here. 6. That group, just to give them something to do, Group A is going to try entrenching. They don't do it. Group B in the buildings now. Maybe there's a bit more potential here. They can target... Oh, sorry, not the buildings, the escarpment. I have to keep reminding myself I'm in the desert here. They are at relative range 1. No, it's not really worth doing anything with them at the moment. The half-track, of course, is going to attempt to repair its gun. They do not succeed. And this group here, they get 8 firepower with their flanking bonus against German Group C. I wonder... Looking at their options, if the US plays the hero card on one of those men, that doubles his firepower to 2, 3, 4, 5, and that makes it firepower 10. Oh yes, they're going to do it. So Private McElroy decides he's going to be heroic, pops up, and encourages the group to lay down a very heavy fire on those 3 Germans over there. Now the Germans, when they drew at the end of their last turn, I'm sorry I didn't show it to you, they got a hero card as well. And in anticipate... No, they're going to hold on to it because you can play it at any time. So they will keep it ready in case poor Streak runs away, but they really need to keep an eye on their machine gunner too. So... Firepower of 5, they have no concealment cards, plus they're in wire, so 6. This could be catastrophic. What happens to Private Schussel? He is pinned, or he would be, but the Germans counter with the hero card, so he is not. What about Private Schumacher? Oh my goodness, Private Schumacher has been killed. So, although Schussel, with his LMG, has stayed in the game by by being incredibly brave, his comrade Schussel has just bought it, drops his rifle, and that just leaves poor Streak over there. Okay. Unfortunately, that is the equivalent to his panic value. So we first of all have to see what happens if he routs, whether he routs or not. Yes, he's drawn an 8 if you look under the R for the rout column. So Streak has seen enough, and despite Schussel's heartfelt entreaties that he stay and help him, Streak decides that he'd rather live a few years longer, so he flees. He's gone. Right, so that was a truly horrific turn for the Germans. Even if Schussel gets his machine gun working again, he's operating it on his own, and that will severely reduce his firepower. Very, very bad news indeed. And in fact, he's going to try and do just that, because his main reason for existing is that gun, and he finally does it. No doubt motivated by desperation, but he has got his machine gun back in working order. Not before time, too. He really wants to move out of that very disadvantageous position there. And all the Germans have got is a very high value firing card. The United States, in the meantime, is once more stuck. None of the German units are moving. And while they dearly love to ditch what really is a soft sand card on their enemies, they can't do that. So they might take a risk and chuck out the weakest of their concealment cards and the marsh come soft sand card, and draw 2. Now, you might be wondering why I didn't tell the half-track to try and fix its machine gun again. My thinking there was that the US are developing a clear advantage, and it's in their interest to press it one way or another, either by firing continuously or by advancing on the German position, either one of those two. And they can't do that. They can't discard cards while any of their groups take action. So it is worth telling the half-track to wait and see how their hand develops. The Germans, in the meantime, are very stuck for options. Even the closest Americans are beyond Schussel's ability to bring machine gun fire to bear on them. And the same goes for that group. The Germans simply don't have enough firepower at this range. So what they're going to do, they're going to take a big old risk. Actually, it's not that much of a risk. They will get rid of that card because there is no way they can play it this turn. And they will draw a movement card. Well, I can tell you in advance what that's going to be doing. Next turn, it's going to be getting rid of that wire card, because Schussel really does need to make a move. The question now is, and the German player would in theory be unaware of this, are the US going to let him? Now, these two haven't done much for a while, so I think I'm going to get them to see if they can winkle out their German opposite numbers. At a relative range of 3, they develop 4 firepower, which is perfect for this card. So they are going to shoot. Firepower of 2 is negated by the escarpment's defensive modifier to 0. The Germans have no concealment card, so Private Beck first. Nope, he's not harmed in any way. And Private Wallach. Ooh, Private Wallach is pinned. Not bad. Now, the question for this group is, can they do anything useful? And the answer at the moment is not really. They're not developing enough firepower. May as well just leave them there. As a group here has already taken an action, the half track is going to try and repair its machine gun. The crew does this successfully, so from next turn they are back in action. And lastly, this group, because of their flanking of Schussel's position, they again devastatingly double their firepower and are able to play that card. So 4 +1 for poor Schussel being in wire up to 5. Again, the Germans have no, well, they wouldn't have any concealment cards if they didn't a minute ago. So 5 plus, oh dear, another kill shot. Private Schussel is dead. And because he was the last member of Group C, all the assets, by way of dropped weapons and similar that are in Group C have disappeared. So one section of the German squad has been completely wiped out now. And with only 6 men left, the German squad is perilously close to reaching their break point. I mean, contrast this with the US, who have not lost a single man so far. It's looking pretty dire. I would say that this is looking like it's going to be a US victory, but not until Lady Luck sings, eh? Although, mind you, she's been favouring them most of the games so far. But, that said, up front can be full of surprises. I have been trying to play the Germans to the best of my ability, by the way, in terms of their numbers relative to the US force and what I thought they would have sensibly done. Naturally, I do welcome any criticisms of tactics and behaviour. So if you thought I've been terribly mishandling the Germans this scenario, please do say so. Advice is always welcome. Right. Preserving the integrity of their squad is now of paramount importance, so the Germans will expend that Rally 3 card just to get Private Wallach back in. They are going to have to press forward. Their only hope, unless they miraculously wipe out large numbers of Americans, is to try and go for occupying that defensible terrain. So, somewhat reluctantly, because that escarpment was so good, the main German maneuver and assault group is going to press forward. It's getting a bit close now. We're still only in deck 1, and some groups are within relative range 4 now. But the Germans are hoping if there's no interference, they can enter that wadi. Won't be quite as good as being on the escarpment, but it's still defensible terrain, and it's a step closer. So they draw their cards. Oh, interesting. And hope for a better turn ahead. Now the US force, in the meantime, they are very richly endowed with movement cards. I am going to... Group D is now a little bit out of it, unfortunately, because having got rid of the people obliquely next to them, they've now got a bit of a dangling empty flank there. So as the US player, I would focus more on getting these assets forward. The thinking is, because it's got much more firepower at this range particularly, let's see, relative range 4 from Group A. They haven't got enough, nowhere near enough, to use that delicious firing card. But no, there's no way they do either. And the half track, definitely not, although it's 10 at relative range 3. So, as the US player, I would order the support group forward. While instructing the half track to risk a bit of lateral movement, as the Germans don't appear to have any heavy anti-tank weapons, in an attempt to flank the German Group B. Now this could come unstuck because if the M3 gets into a flanking position before the Germans reach their next bit of terrain, then it'll be a very short-lived advantage. But what can you do? So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This group generates 9 firepower. Not enough to use that, but they might just entrench just in case, and they do it, having removed the threat most immediately to the front of them. They have succeeded in digging into all that lovely sand. So, with a good turn under their belts, the US forge on with their card draw. As for the Germans, it's been a fairly rotten game for them so far, but they are not going to let the US have it all their own way. Now that Group B is moving, even though they're moving cautiously along the escarpment, they still present a nice tempting target for the soldiers in Group A over there. And they are going to hit them with that card. So, firepower of 2. +1 for the movement makes it 3, -2 for the escarpment is 1. And unfortunately for the Germans, the US is taking no chances whatsoever. So a concealment card of -3 means that the final firepower is -2. So let's see what happens. Sergeant Burnett, no. Nowhere near. Private Fox, no. And Private Myers, no. No. Creditable effort on the German part, but not enough to deter the advancing Americans. In the meantime, 6, 7, 8. That group, because it's moving, develops 8 firepower. Annoyingly, not enough for them to play that card, but they can do that one. So they are going to try. It's a bit of a weak firing card, and the odds are not good. But they are going to try. They are going to try targeting the US Group B again. It's probably their best bet. So firepower of 1, +1 for the US movement, -2 makes it 0 again for the escarpment. And again, the US player is not taking chances. He's going to make their firepower -1. So Sergeant Burnett, nope, he's not bothered. Private Fox again, not troubled by the incoming fire. And lastly, Myers, no. No, so every German who can see a target is trying to lay down suppressive fire, but no dice. And, oh, that was the US hand, sorry. I'll show you the German hand. Arguably, I've made a mistake. Some would say I probably should have got that squad stuffed into the Wadi quick as I could. But I'm one of those players who, if I see a shot and I think it can achieve something, I will take it. So diving into the Wadi will have to wait till next turn for German Group B. In the meantime, they draw their cards and, oh, maybe. Ooh, okay. If they can get close enough to use those, they might still pull something out of this. We're getting near to the end of deck 1, so who knows, a sandstorm might end everything for everyone. Things are really close now, so I think Smith and Burke over there, it's worth them trying to entrench, which they do. Well done, you two. Okay. The US is continuing their fortunate streak. Their 2 most vulnerable soldiers are now as well protected as they could expect to be. Group B, in the meantime, is going to occupy that hill because that gives them some lovely, lovely advantages. I think, don't know how long the Germans are going to be moving, because in theory, as the US player, I've no idea what's in the German hand. That level of building is, of course, a cower card in the desert rules, so we're just going to accept that we're still in open ground. Doesn't bother us. The M3 is an armoured vehicle, so they're not going to be too intimidated by anything the Germans have got. because most importantly, they now enjoy flanking fire against the Germans. And next turn, if the Germans don't get their heads down, there's going to be an awful lot of fire heading in the direction of their Group B. So quite content with that, the Americans will draw their cards. Give me a moment while I just reshuffle the deck. So that is the end of deck 1 of 3. And of course, when I complete the American draw, I will also have to draw a sandstorm test to see whether the notorious, if hopefully not too frequent, bad weather in the desert causes any ruckus. So I'll finish drawing cards for the US. They just picked up that small firepower card, a sniper, a rally card, handy, and another rally card, very handy. Ooh, we don't want one of those next if we want to win the scenario. And the sandstorm test card. Phew. Okay, if that had been a red 6, that would have ended the scenario straight away. But as it's a black one, the weather remains clear. Hot, sunny, not a cloud in the sky. There we go. Ideal conditions, we hope. Right. That group there, German Group A, can do nothing. However, the German maneuver group, they're now very conscious they've been flanked by the US armoured vehicles, so they are going to hurl themselves into the Wadi as their action. And they can congratulate themselves. They have got out of that sticky situation. And hopefully next turn they will be close enough, at least to some of the US infantry, to start punishing them with these heavy fire cards. In fact, actually, they're going to be doing a lot of shooting from the looks of things. What are the US going to be doing? Well, it's much to their annoyance they can no longer use that firepower card. They were so close, so close. Right, what to do? That group can't do much. That group can't do much either, although I suppose they could lay down fire on I think what I'll do is I'll have the group on the hill entrench, which is something I would do whenever I can. They don't manage it. And the half track, it's a bit of a pathetic gesture now that they've lost their flanking fire position, but what the heck, they're just going to blaze away at Group B in the vain hope that they might clip someone. I mean, the Germans have no concealment cards, so it might be worth it, but firepower 1 cancelled by the defensive modifier of the Wadi, so Sergeant Dietinger, you're not bothered. Corporal Hessel, you're not bothered. Private Bernhoff, no, you're not troubled either. And lastly, Private Wolf. Oh, Private Wolf is pinned. That was worth it. That could actually wreck the German intentions for their next turn. So that was worth doing. Oh, well done, half track. I take it back. All right. Maybe good, maybe not. So the Germans, that's very irritating for them because that group has not got enough firepower to use. Oh, wait, do they? Relative range 3. Oh, they do. It may be worth them trying to... The weaker morale of that group is more than offset by the terrain that they're in, and they're less of a threat than the group that's now setting up on the hill. So the group here, German Group A, is going to target US Group B with that card. And the US has no concealment cards, so firepower of 2 reduced to 1 for the hill. Sergeant Burnett is not bothered. Private Fox is not bothered. And Private Myers, is definitely not bothered, and one of the Germans has a broken rifle. Looking at the position number, it's 2. So the unfortunate Private Wallach is going to be spending some time clearing a jam in his rifle. That didn't go well. As for the Germans, they're at relative range 4 to 2 of the American groups. But they've only got 8 firepower thanks to Wolfe being out of it. So with great reluctance, they're going to spend that Rally 5 card that they've been holding on to for so long, because they desperately, desperately need to be able to answer some of this volume of US fire that's coming in on them. And hopefully, if they can get through the next turn without too many problems, they'll be able to do that. Those could be handy, but they're roads to nowhere without more terrain cards. Let's see what happens. The US. Okay. Not really in a position to do anything too useful this turn, so the temptation is to expend a sniper card while chucking out their weakest rally card at the moment. So the rally can just go. They're going to target the stronger German group, and the sniper is aiming at Sergeant Dietinger. Oh yeah, cut off the serpent's head. And it was a terrible shot. Really, really awful. Oh dear. He's a lucky man, this US sniper. The number of times he's given his position away. Okay, the US seems to be getting all the terrain cards while the Germans are getting all the movement cards. Tough decision for the Germans. Easy one for that group. Wallach is going to try and fix his rifle. And he succeeds. The good old Kar 98K is quite an easy weapon to get back into action. But this group has a terrible decision. The awful shot of that US sniper makes any counterfire very likely to succeed. It's a good way of making sniper cards useless to the Americans if they can hit him. But is it worth risking it? Is it worth spending the turn doing that instead of firing one of these really powerful cards at the US? I have a feeling, just because opportunities like that terrible sniper shot, do not come round very often, the Germans are going to try and capitalize on it. And they fail. Bad call. Bad call. I should have fired. They won't discard any cards from their hand because they will need every single one of them next turn. The US, in the meantime, has got more cards that than they can really shake a stick at, unfortunately. They're going to take a bit of a chance on this. No, they'll get rid of the woods because the gullies aren't brilliant, but at least you know with a gully you're actually going to get it. I'm a bit worried about the woods possibly being a mirage. Sorry, I shouldn't call them the woods, I should say the oasis. So we will chuck out the oasis, and just to be absolutely horrible, we'll place a wire card on the wadi. US hands draw. So. Ooh, another sniper card. Another chance for the man to prove himself. The Germans do need a clear shot, so much to their annoyance, they're going to spend this turn expending a maneuver card to clear that wire card before they begin shooting. And the card they draw to fill up the hand is brush. Well, it's defensive terrain. Still good. Back to the United States. Not a huge fan of the smoke cards, especially when you don't particularly need them. So the US will do another discard this turn. And emboldened by the fact that he's still alive, for one thing, the sniper is going to target German Group B again. And again, he's going to set his sights on Sergeant Dietinger. This must be personal. Let's see what happens. And it's a pin. Sergeant Dietinger has been pinned. Now that's bad news for the Germans, because until he rallies, their hand size is reduced by 1. That sniper has just caused them a lot of trouble, especially as the Americans are going to be on the move again, or at least an element of them are. Right, a very desperate situation for the Germans. That group can no longer move. So in some desperation, because they have that defensive terrain and they really must push forward before the US gets to relative range 4, they are going to risk sending Privates Beck and Wallach forward. If they can just make it into better terrain, it will up their firepower a bit more too. Meanwhile, the Germans, despite the fact that Dietinger is pinned, I'm going to make an emotional decision here. Put it down to battlefield craziness, what have you. They're going to try and get rid of that damned sniper. And they fail. That could prove to be a terrible mistake, but on the behalf of the German squad, I was really cross with that sniper and I wanted him got rid of. I made a bit of a silly gamble there and it proved to be not worth it, but at least we might see Sergeant Dietinger back next turn. Oh, no, we don't. Apologies. The German hand size is reduced by 1. They don't get that card because they want to keep all of these. So back to the US, we are going to start seeing some things happening now. They've got 9 firepower at the moment, increased to 10 because they're on the... Oh no, it increases the firepower of cards they play, but still not good enough, not quite. So they're just going to try to entrench because they are quite vulnerable up there. That fails. I am going to get the half track into motion, so we're going to start sending him off. We need to get it a bit closer, at least until we get some decent firepower cards that it can play from further away. So far we haven't been getting those, so the half track is revving up to come and support its comrades. That lot are still sitting pretty. A thought which should have occurred to me much, much, much earlier, but has only just done so now, is that we ought to send Group D hurtling forward in a headlong charge, because if we get them to relative range 4 and they occupy defensive terrain, then bam, we've won the game. And the Germans have failed to keep us back. So I might, in addition to trying to crush the German squad, might get them moving at the first opportunity, because that piles the pressure on the Germans and their options are only diminishing as the game goes on. So we will draw 1 card to bring us back up to 6. The Germans breathe a huge sigh of relief that nothing was discarded on their moving group. They gratefully tumble into the concealment of that scrub or brush or whatever it is. Despite the fact that Dietinger is pinned, the Germans still have enough firepower. 6, 7... Oh no, they do not, because they're not at relative range 5. Oh, the frustration. Okay, they're going to risk hanging on to these. Okay, a rally card would have been nice, but what can you do? Okay. They will do nothing. They will attempt to entrench. No, definitely not. I will not drive the half track into a gully, because that would be very, very crazy. In fact, actually, it was a bit dim of me. Rather than entrenching, I probably should have discarded, but never mind. That was a mistake on the American side. Now this group doesn't have enough firepower to do anything, but this group can start doing some shooting. So they could target the half track in the hope of pinning it, or they could target the group on the hill. Now, of the two, the half track develops more firepower, and also it can't play concealment cards, so it's worth the Germans shooting at it. So 3, it's on the move for 4, but beefs up the fact that it's got no cover, and they will attempt to suppress it. And note they do not. They do manage it. 4, its morale is 4, so they have suppressed the crew of the half track. So that has slowed the US down. The hail of bullets has forced the crew to keep their heads down. And while it's still moving, once it gets into new terrain, it'll behave exactly the same as a pinned soldier. The US will have to wake that up. Unfortunately for the Germans, they can't see what's in the US player's hand. Were this a two-player game, the US player would probably be making a big show of how terribly upset he is, knowing full well that he'll have that thing back in action before long. The Germans will keep those firepower cards, again hoping for better days, and just draw 1. Okay, they'll still be able to offer resistance. Right, the US player needs to do things. I'm going to attempt to entrench that group again, and we do it. I must say the US have proven much more adept at entrenchment in this game than their German opposite numbers have. So that group on the hill is just that little bit more secure. The half-track crew rallies. Once the initial burst of German fire has moved on, they prove they're not actually that bothered by it. So they've got their heads above, metaphorically above water again. And we will just draw for the US side that one card. Ooh, okay, handy. Although the question is, what am I going to do with that escarpment? Because the only unit that's moving is the half track. You can't move them onto escarpments. That is, well, vehicles can't enter escarpments. That's a bit of a shame for the US player. On the German side, their weaker squad is going to try to entrench. They fail. And the larger unit is going to risk another shot at the half track in the hope that they can pin it again. So base value of 2, firepower 1, plus it's moving in the open. Nope, they don't manage to intimidate it this time. Germans make their draw. A rally card. Finally, it would be worth burning that next turn just to get Dietinger back in the game. The Americans, for their part, have got so many rally cards. They are actually quite tempted to ditch that one. And actually the escarpment is more useful than the gully. So both of those are just going to go in the discard pile. The Americans will hope they get something a bit better. Ooh, very useful. Germans, meanwhile, they'll try and entrench Group A. Nope. And they will then, somewhat extravagant, but they really need Sergeant Dietinger back. And much to their relief, he comes back to them. Which means they get their 5-card hand again. Ooh, okay, potentially a damaging combo for the US next turn, especially if at the end of the next US turn that half track is still moving, because it might find it has soft sand dumped on it, and that could cause problems. So over to the United States. I am sorely tempted to use that as a flank card, but I won't for reasons I'll explain in a minute. I instead would like to, well, that is a cower card, so that is going to halt the half-track's movement and incidentally dash any German hopes of playing horrible terrain on it. Rather than play this as a flank card, I'm going to make good on my promise to get this group moving. Again, it's going to pile pressure on the Germans because it's developing a new threat to their position, which they'll somehow have to try and deal with despite all this nonsense that's pressing them on the front. So yes, the whole US formation is on the move, and they're proving no less fortunate with movement cards than they were earlier in the game. So on the German turn, what is going to happen? They will attempt to entrench that group. No joy. This group is going to fire. Now that they have got their full complement of men back, they develop 10 firepower. Well, no question about it. They're going to use that card. And actually, they're going to shoot at that group. So it's firepower of 4, reduced to 3 because it's quite far obliquely away, back up to 4 for the movement, -1 for the rocky cover. So 3, that's actually quite devastating. The US is going to chuck in a concealed card to make it 2, but let's see what happens. Corporal Moores is pinned. Private McElroy is not. Private Fratali is not, and somebody's weapon has malfunctioned. Ah, bad luck. Private Wolf's rifle jams, and that brings to an end the German firing. Terribly bad luck for the Germans. However, they have not they've not finished yet, because of course they can always discard a card, and they are going to inflict soft sand on this US group, because after all, why should they have it easy? Now, in the desert rules, you cannot reject this card. In a European scenario or a jungle scenario, marsh can be rejected. Under the desert rules, it cannot. So not only is Corporal Moores pinned, but he's inadvertently led them into soft sand. That's not brilliant. But never mind. I'm sure that there's some way that they will get themselves out of it. At least that doesn't represent a terribly essential part of the US push. So the Germans would draw their cards, and ooh, they have some terrifying shooting cards in there. The question is, do they have any hope of using them? I suspect the answer's not. I'm conscious the game's gone on for nearly an hour again, so I'm going to bring the video to a stop here. I think it is very likely the Germans are going to lose this one. The United States Army has, the unit in play has got too much firepower. They're pressing on really, really hard. The Germans have very few mobility options. Their best bet is to just keep firing away and try to slow the Americans down, or maybe even kill a few of them. But they would have to do that so effectively to get a squad break. And of course, this being the desert, their weapons keep jamming or breaking. The US ones are malfunctioning too, but seemingly not at the same rate. So it's turning into a really, really bad scenario for the Germans, allied to the really uncomfortable fact that if they lose 2 more men to whatever cause, then their squad is broken anyway. But I will play this scenario out to the bitter end to see what happens, because the Germans could always pray for a sandstorm. That might well happen. Let's see. But in any case, I hope you've enjoyed following this battle so far, and I hope that this has been of use to those of you who are like me when I first bought this game, trying to get your head round up front. I've no doubt made some mistakes. If you spot any, please say what they were, and I'll publish a remedial note in the video description. But again, I hope you've enjoyed this and found it useful. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate your company. Goodbye.